Everyone. Mr. Terhar with your e-learning lesson for May the 11th. Today we're going to finish up our discussion that we started late last week on employment legislation and some of the laws that exist that basically are intended to protect the rights of workers, and companies have to be aware of those laws so that they can make sure that they are in compliance with them. And if a company fails to comply with those laws, they can face fines and sanctions from the federal government, and they can even be shut down. So we're going to finish up talking about those laws today, and then you will have a worksheet to complete on employment legislation. So the last thing we talked about was the Occupational Safety and Health Act and how it was relevant to agriculture. And we gave you a couple of examples of instances in agriculture that the Occupational Safety and Health Act would come into play, one of which was the required use of personal protective equipment when handling things like anhydrous ammonia, which is a fertilizer that can be very toxic if you get too close to it, or if you were to inhale it, for example, it could be deadly. So PPE is very important when it comes to working with anhydrous ammonia. Another example was rollover protection, particularly on older tractors like the one you see there in the photo. Previously, open station tractors that didn't have a cab were very prone to rolling over. If you were going up a hill or working on a hillside, they could roll over, and if they rolled over, they inevitably would crush the driver of the tractor. So the Occupational Safety and Health Act required that all tractors over 20 horsepower be equipped with some sort of a rollover protective device to help protect those drivers. Another provision in the Occupational Safety and Health Act was field sanitation. So the Occupational Safety and Health Act calls for employers to provide drinking water and toilet facilities for employees involved in hand labor in the field. So it applies only when 11 or more employees are working in the field. Now, we don't see a lot of this here in Indiana, just because the type of farming that we have here doesn't require a whole lot of manpower. You're never going to see more than 11 people, planting a cornfield or, side dressing a field. The size of our equipment allows us to not have to have too many laborers. But when you look at elements of agriculture like vegetable production, it's still a very hands-on, very manual, labor-driven field. And every now and then you'll see a tomato field, for example. Tomato production still requires a lot of manpower, a lot of employees working in the field at any given time. And whenever you see a tomato field, you'll probably more than likely also see a portable toilet in that field too. And that is because of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Basically, they're saying that if you have more than 11 people working in a field at any given time, you need to make sure that you have a source of clean drinking water and toilet facilities for those people. So the last thing we're going to talk about is legislation that might affect migrant labor and alien workers. So agriculture in many parts of the United States utilizes a lot of migrant labor, basically laborers that have immigrated to the United States or that move around quite frequently. It is a major part of the agricultural labor force. These workers play an important role in the ability of the producer to deliver an affordable product to consumers. And there is legislation that exists that serves to both protect these individuals as well as restrict how they are utilized and how they are documented. So the first law that we'll talk about is the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act. I know that's a mouthful, but it was established in 1983, and it sets forth the minimum standards for employers using migrant laborers or workers that move from one region of the country to another in search of employment. So once again, you don't see a lot of it here just because we're mostly row crop production, but if you go out west, places like California, where they grow a lot of vegetables or where they have a lot of fruit orchards and things like that, migrant laborers are a big part of that type of ag production because it's very seasonal work. When it comes time to harvest, a lot of labor is needed for a short period of time. So migrant laborers might bounce around to 5 or 10 or maybe even more different farms and work on those farms. So they move around a lot from farm to farm in search of employment. And those workers are unique because they don't fall under the typical umbrella of employee type that we've seen before. A typical employee works for one person all year round, puts in 40 hours a week, sometimes more for overtime, but it's all very, regimented, very irregular. Migrant laborers, a lot of times, they go stretches of time where they may not be employed, or their hours may fluctuate greatly from, one week to the next. They're an exception to a lot of the rules that we see. So uh, that's migrant laborers. So seasonal laborers travel to different areas to work for a particular time as well. So the MSPA includes requirements that basically regulate how these migrant workers are used and how they are treated by their employers. So migrant workers have to be provided with housing that meets safety and health standards. So you have to provide them a place to live if you utilize migrant workers. Contractors are prohibited from forcing migrant workers to buy goods and supplies from only them. So this provision traces its roots back to um, the coal mines, the early coal mines back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There was a coal boom in the Appalachian Mountains, and these coal companies would come in and they would hire large labor forces, and they would actually build these towns that were built around the coal mine. The town was actually owned by the coal mine in a lot of situations. The town would build all the homes, they would own all the businesses, and what those coal companies would do is, instead of paying their workers an actual wage, paying them, in dollars, they would give them what they called script, which was basically tokens or currency that was only good at the company store. So they wouldn't pay you money that you could take and go buy goods. They would give you script, and that script was only good at the company store. So they effectively owned those employees. Those employees had no way out. They had no way of saving money to maybe move away from there and start a life somewhere else, or didn't have the ability to even go shop somewhere outside of the company store. And it created this vicious cycle that made it impossible for these people that worked for the coal company to get out. So we realize that's a pretty horrible thing, and that's why we have that provision in this legislation. So labor contracts must include basic written information in English or another language that's common to the workers. You have to understand that oftentimes these migrant workers are not native English speakers. Spanish a lot of times is their first language, so we have to make sure that the contracts are available in their language so that they can read them and understand what they're getting into before they agree to work there. The Immigration Reform and Control Act, or the IRCA. The IRCA came into law in 1986, and the idea was it attempted to balance the need for foreign workers in certain areas of agriculture with increased control over illegal immigration. The IRCA impacts agriculture in several ways. So basically, the IRCA was an attempt to balance out illegal immigration when it comes to agriculture. Um, Large numbers of illegal immigrants are employed in agriculture. It's just the fact of the matter. They work as migrant workers. A lot of times, meat processing plants will have high percentages of illegal immigrants. It's a fact of the matter, and we realize that if we all of a sudden were to decide we were going to get rid of, or not get rid of, I should say, deport, every single illegal alien, illegal immigrant in this country, it would be devastating to the agriculture industry. We would lose a huge, huge number of our employees. Things would grind to a halt. So we didn't want that to happen, but also we wanted to make sure that we were giving these people and basically giving companies the ability to uh, control and make sure that they are not hiring illegal immigrants. So that was kind of hard to explain that one a little bit, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying there. So it requires employers to verify the identity of the workers that they hire. They must verify that workers are authorized to be employed in this country. So basically, it puts the responsibility of making sure, hey, if I'm a company and I'm hiring someone, it's my responsibility to make sure that they are indeed in this country legally and that they do have documentation, uh, while still protecting some of those illegal aliens as well. Okay, so that is our lesson for today. There is a worksheet on Canvas that you need to complete, and that will be your e-learning assignment today. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. Thanks.